Good morning. Let's go on a journey from the east to the west, and then we go up to space. So our first stop would be the land of Mesopotamia. And it is where the first civilization was ever enabled on the resources of the Euphrates and the Tigris. It is also where writing was first invented. Thousands of years later, and specifically to 1974, we have this picture. It was taken on the same land as that first civilization in modern-day Iraq, where 30% of the people live on agriculture and they take it as a source of their livelihood. Not even 50 years later, this is what that same land looks like. 7 million people are affected by water insecurity, and thousands of people are displaced due to drastic climate consequences, and the temperatures are rising 7 times faster than the global average. With summers reaching over 50 degrees centigrade, the peak electricity demand has increased by 46%, and the CO2 emissions have increased by almost 200% just in the last 2 decades. And these are the wires that you see from electricity trying to keep up with the demand. And they are, just by looking at them, they are dangerous. And even at the emergency room, we've seen more patients presenting to us with injuries from those wires, especially given the increased temperatures and how dangerous that makes them and increase their exposure to fires. The impact is that tangible on the country level in both the rural and in the urban areas. So this is Baghdad, the capital, with a population of 8 million people. And working in the emergency room, you don't even need to look out of the window to see that there is this sandstorm that's happening. You can clearly see it in the profile of the patients who present to you with exacerbations of their asthma and their chronic diseases and even their heart attacks, as we saw in the previous presentation. This is the headline from the BBC. It says, Iraq dust storm leaves 5,000 people needing treatment, and sadly, it was the 7th severe dust storm in a month. If we continue on this level, we see that the health risks of heat stress would cause deaths in the elderly, those above 65 years of age, and it would be more than 60 deaths per 100,000 people annually. Whereas if we go to a low emission scenario, those deaths would be 14 per 100,000, and the difference would be 4.5 times, just between the low emission and high emission scenarios. Through satellite images, we see those sandstorms as they form, which would be very, very useful in public health planning rather than just reaction in the emergency rooms. Globally, there are disparities in the availability and the distribution of healthcare. And looking at Iraq, the disparities are evident. We see here the contrast between the hospital density on the left and the population density on the right. And now let's contextualize that clinically. What does all of that mean for our patients, and what does that mean for us as people? Let's take our eyes as an example, because our eyes are the most vulnerable organ to environmental insults, as their function depends on the quality of the environment. High UV light density leads to more cataracts, which is an uncommunicable disease, and high environmental hazards leads to increased microbial keratitis, which is an infection of the transparent layer in front of the eye, which is a communicable disease. And that affects both people living in urban and rural areas, but it's more affecting the people who are living in rural areas, especially those who work with agriculture. So let's think back to the 30% of people working in agriculture. What does that mean for them? They are at increased risk for developing these conditions, and they are especially vulnerable because they have economic vulnerabilities in that when you cannot see, you cannot work, which affects your economic power and your ability to seek medical care and pay your medical bills. And at the same time, you're already living in an area with low health access and with low density of healthcare facilities, which would put not only those individuals, but their entire families and their entire households at a vulnerable state. Those people would be especially vulnerable for recruitment, and it would cause a security challenge and security implications for the country, for the region, and internationally. Because what happened with ISIS was that those people were the targets for recruitment. And from what we discussed, we have three main challenges. Challenges in health access disparities, and in cataracts, which is a non-communicable disease, and in communicable conditions. The Earth observations would be helpful in providing infrastructure imaging, in that it would allow us to assess the damage to the infrastructure caused by climate-related events like floods and even by conflict. With UV radiation tracking, would be able to track the changes in the ozone levels and air pollution. And similarly, with air quality monitoring, we would be able to identify areas with poor air quality and plan the public health interventions accordingly. Now let's go to the Pacific Ocean. So we can look at El Nino and La Nina. They are both Pacific Ocean climate patterns that affect the weather globally. El Nino is a periodic warming of sea surface temperatures, and it's in the central and eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean. It occurs every 2 to 7 years, and it can have significant impacts on the global weather patterns, causing increased rainfalls in some regions and the droughts in the others. So when it brings droughts, it would bring mosquitoes, it would bring dry eyes, it would increase cataracts, it would decrease our ability to have effective agriculture, which would cause poverty, and that would increase non-communicable diseases and communicable diseases as well, and also increase infections. La Nina is the opposite. So the same areas that would have droughts, they would have a flooding when they have La Nina, and that would also increase exposure to mosquitoes, loss to glasses, loss to property and poverty, and even infections. These are sea surface temperature images, and this is a headline from the European Space Agency saying another El Nino on the horizon. So from that, we conclude that by sea surface heights measurements and forecasting, we can forecast and predict El Nino and La Nina, and therefore forecast the implications that that would have on eye health and also on the general health for the population. And these are the four main challenges and the opportunities that Earth observations would provide for the health, for our health and for our planet's health. And from the east and from the west, our journey takes us to space. And from space, you see a fragile blue dot. It's the only home we have ever known, and it's where everyone you know, everyone you love, and everyone you've ever heard of lives. And with Earth observation from space, we have a unique lens into the health of our planet and into our own health. It's not just about seeing, it's about understanding, appreciating, and safeguarding our interconnected home and our own health and each other. Thank you.